Hello everyone and welcome back to Learn English with Podcasts. I'm Jack.
And I'm Emma. In today's episode, we're going to explore two important topics in English grammar: passive voice and reported speech. These structures are essential for emphasizing different parts of a sentence and conveying information that was originally said by someone else.
That's right, Emma. We'll explain how and when to use these structures, provide lots of examples, and explore various situations where they're commonly used. Let's dive in. Emma, let's start with the passive voice. What exactly is the passive voice and why is it important?
The passive voice is a grammatical construction where the object of an action becomes the subject of the sentence. It's important because it allows us to focus on the action or the receiver of the action rather than the doer. The passive voice is especially useful when the doer is unknown, unimportant, or obvious.
Can you give us an example of a sentence in the active voice and how it changes when converted to the passive voice?
Sure. Here's an example. Active voice: the chef cooked the meal. Passive voice: the meal was cooked by the chef.
So in the passive voice, the focus shifts to the meal rather than the chef.
Exactly, Jack. In the passive voice, the emphasis is on the action itself or its result, not necessarily on who performed the action.
Emma, when should we use the passive voice in English?
The passive voice is commonly used in several situations, including when the doer is unknown: the painting was stolen last night. When the doer is unimportant or obvious: the cake was baked in the oven. When we want to emphasize the action rather than the doer: the bridge was completed in 2012. In formal or scientific writing: the experiment was conducted by researchers.
So if I don't know who performed the action or if it doesn't matter who did it, the passive voice is a good choice.
Exactly, Jack. The passive voice is perfect when the focus is on the action itself rather than on who performed it.
How do we form the passive voice in different tenses, Emma?
The passive voice is formed by using the verb to be followed by the past participle of the main verb. The tense of the passive voice depends on the tense of the original active sentence.
Can you give us some examples in different tenses?
Sure. Present simple: the report is written by the manager. Past simple: the letter was sent yesterday. Present continuous: the project is being reviewed. Past continuous: the house was being painted. Present perfect: the results have been announced. Past perfect: the decision had been made.
So if I want to say something in the present simple passive, I'd use is or are with the past participle, like the book is read by many people.
Exactly. The structure remains consistent across tenses, with the verb to be changing to match the tense of the sentence.
Emma, what are some common mistakes learners make with the passive voice and how can they avoid them?
A common mistake is forgetting to include the verb to be when forming the passive voice, or using the wrong form of to be for the tense. Another mistake is overusing the passive voice when the active voice would be clearer and more direct. To avoid these mistakes, learners should practice forming passive sentences in different tenses and be mindful of when it's appropriate to use the passive voice. Remember, the passive voice is useful, but the active voice is often clearer and more engaging.
Now let's move on to reported speech. Emma, what is reported speech and why do we use it?
Reported speech, also known as indirect speech, is a way of conveying what someone else has said without quoting their exact words. It's important because it allows us to share information from someone else while making it part of our own sentence.
How does reported speech differ from direct speech?
In direct speech, we use the speaker's exact words and place them inside quotation marks. In reported speech, we change the structure of the sentence and often shift the tense of the verbs. For example, direct speech: she said, "I am tired." Reported speech: she said that she was tired.
So in reported speech, we adjust the sentence to fit into our own narrative.
Exactly, Jack. Reported speech is about rephrasing what someone else said in a way that makes sense in your own context.
Emma, how do we change tenses when converting direct speech to reported speech?
When converting direct speech to reported speech, we often shift the tense of the verb back one step in time. For example, present tense verbs in direct speech usually change to past tense in reported speech.
Could you give us some examples?
Certainly. Present simple to past simple. Direct: he says, "I live in London." Reported he said that he lived in London. Present continuous to past continuous. Direct she said, I am reading a book. Reported she said that she was reading a book. Present perfect to past perfect. Direct they said, we have finished our work. Reported they said that they had finished their work. Past simple to past perfect. Direct he said, I went to the store. Reported he said that he had gone to the store.
So if I'm reporting something someone said in the present simple, I'd change it to the past simple in reported speech.
Exactly. It's important to shift the tense back to maintain the correct sequence of events in reported speech. Emma, how do we report questions in reported speech? When reporting questions, we usually change the structure of the question to match a statement and adjust the tense accordingly. We don't use question marks in reported speech.
Could you give us some examples?
Sure. Yes, no questions. Direct he asked, are you coming? Reported he asked if I was coming. To where questions. Direct she asked, where do you live? Reported she asked where I lived.
So if I'm reporting a yes-no question, I'd use if or whether and change the question into a statement.
Exactly. The key is to rephrase the question into a statement and adjust the tense as needed.
How do we report requests and commands in reported speech?
When reporting requests and commands, we often use the verb tell or ask followed by an infinitive. The structure is slightly different from reporting statements or questions.
Examples?
Of course. Requests. Direct she said, please help me. Reported she asked me to help her. Commands. Direct he said, close the door. Reported he told me to close the door.
So if I'm reporting a command like someone telling me to sit down, I'd say he told me to sit down.
Exactly, Jack. Use tell or ask followed by the infinitive to report requests and commands.
Emma, how do we report modal verbs like can, will, and must in reported speech?
When reporting modal verbs, we usually shift the modal verb to its past form. However, some modals, like might and could, don't change.
Could you give us some examples?
Sure. Can to could. Direct she said, I can swim. Reported she said that she could swim. Will to would. Direct he said, I will help you. Reported he said that he would help me. Must have had to. Direct they said, we must leave early. Reported they said that they had to leave early.
So if someone says they will do something, I'd report it as would instead of will.
Exactly. Most modals change to their past forms in reported speech, though some, like might, stay the same.
Let's go through some practical situations where the passive voice is commonly used.
Sure. Let's look at a few scenarios. Situation 1, talking about completed actions. Jack, the report was completed on time, passive. Emma, yes, and it was reviewed by the manager, passive. Situation 2, describing processes. Jack, the product is manufactured in China, passive. Emma, then it is shipped to stores worldwide, passive. Situation 3, emphasizing the action. Jack, the bridge was built in just 6 months, passive. Emma, that's impressive. It was designed by a renowned architect, passive. Situation 4, reporting news. Jack, a new policy has been implemented by the company, passive. Emma, it was announced at the meeting yesterday, passive. Now let's go through some practical situations where reported speech is commonly used. Sure. Let's look at a few scenarios. Situation 1, reporting conversations. Jack, she said that she was feeling sick, reported speech. Emma, I hope she gets better soon. Situation 2, reporting questions. Jack, he asked if I was going to the party, reported speech. Emma, what did you say? Situation 3, reporting requests. Jack, she asked me to help her with the project, reported speech. Emma, that was nice of you to help. Situation 4, reporting news. Jack, they announced that the event had been postponed, reported speech. Emma, did they say why?
Emma, what are some common mistakes learners make with passive voice and reported speech, and how can they avoid them?
A common mistake with the passive voice is forgetting to include the verb to be or using the wrong form of to be for the tense. To avoid this, practice forming passive sentences in different tenses. With reported speech, a common mistake is not shifting the tense back when reporting someone's words. To avoid this, always consider the original tense and adjust it accordingly when reporting.
Emma, how do we combine passive voice and reported speech in everyday conversation?
Combining these structures is all about understanding the context. You might use the passive voice to describe an action, and then use reported speech to share what someone said about it.
Can you give an example of a conversation that combines these elements?
Absolutely. Here's a dialogue. Jack, the project was completed last week. Passive. Emma, yes, and the manager said that it was done very well. Reported speech. Jack, I heard that too. She mentioned that it was finished ahead of schedule. Reported speech.
Emma, do you have any tips for our listeners on mastering passive voice and reported speech?
Definitely. Here are some tips. Practice with real-life examples. Try converting active sentences to passive and direct speech to reported speech using everyday situations. Focus on the meaning. Think about what you want to emphasize, whether it's the action itself or the information someone shared, and choose the appropriate structure. Use visual aids. Create charts or tables to help you remember the rules for shifting tenses in reported speech and forming the passive voice. Listen and observe. Pay attention to how native speakers use passive voice and reported speech in conversations, news, and media.
Emma, we've covered a lot in this episode. What are your final thoughts on mastering passive voice and reported speech?
These structures are essential for clear and effective communication in English. By understanding how to use the passive voice, you can focus on what's important in a sentence, and by mastering reported speech, you can accurately convey information from others. The key is to practice regularly and pay attention to the context in which these structures are used.
I couldn't agree more, Emma. With practice, anyone can become comfortable using these important grammar tools.
Absolutely, Jack. We encourage all our listeners to incorporate these structures into their daily language use. The more you practice, the more natural they'll become.
That concludes our extended episode on passive voice and reported speech. We hope you found it educational and helpful in your journey to mastering English grammar.
Thank you for joining us on this detailed exploration of these important structures. We appreciate your support and encourage you to keep practicing and learning.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and like this video. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you informative and valuable content.
Until next time, this is Emma.
And this is Jack. Goodbye.
Bye. Remember to leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. Together, we can learn and make a difference.